Who do you say that I am? When I think of myself, I know exactly what you see. Every flaw, every blemish, the scars of my hurts and my mistakes, the things I've done to myself, the things that have been said and done to me, that's who I am. You see a mother, a daughter, a sister, an aunt. You see the scarce shadow of a woman's potential irreversibly wrapped in failure. But then I hear it. That still, small voice. Who told you that? Who told you that you are defined by your mistakes? Who told you that you are ugly and broken? Who told you that you are only measured by what you give others? Who told you that brokenness and frailty are what you carry? Haven't you heard? You are not what everyone says you are. You are who God says you are, and you are His. He says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He says you are a perfect design, made for a purpose, made for a destiny, and you are never alone. He says He'll never leave you nor forsake you. He goes before you. He goes behind you. He says you are bold. He says you are brilliant. He says you are brave. He says greater is He that is in you. You are a masterpiece, hand-painted by the Master Himself. You are who God says you are.
Christian Bootcamp, a Back to Basics Bible study led by the Reverend Dr. B. Kevin Smalls. Christian Bootcamp is a back to basics approach for faith, supported by biblical studies, theology, doctrine, spiritual formation, and special topics. You are in the right place at the right time. Let's get into formation and begin.
Hello, I'm Preston Boyd.
And I'm Jean Boyd.
And we just want to extend an invitation to you to come to Hope United Methodist Church and utilize our food pantry. We're here on the first Saturday of each month from the hours of 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. If you are in need of food assistance, we ask that you call and make a reservation. Our number is 248-356-4408. Be blessed and have a great day.
Hello, I'm Reverend Kevin Small, Senior Pastor here at Hope United Methodist Church, and I'm coming through just to thank you for the way you have responded to our Resurge Generosity Initiative. We have been blessed by the outpouring of our members who showed up, who made commitments, and who have stuck by those commitments so that we can see some of the fruits of those labors. Thanks be to God for all that you have done to help us advance our ministry and where we're going. We are looking forward to 2023, where you will see some of the results in a programmatic way of your giving. So sit back, put your seatbelts on, let us look to God, who will provide us a marvelous and wonderful future as we together resurge in Jesus' name.
Who do you say that I am? When I think of myself, I know exactly what you see. Every flaw, every blemish, the scars of my hurts and my mistakes, the things I've done to myself, the things that have been said and done to me, that's who I am. You see a mother, a daughter, a sister, an aunt. You see the scarce shadow of a woman's potential irreversibly wrapped in failure. But then I hear it. That still, small voice. Who told you that? Who told you that you are defined by your mistakes? Who told you that you are ugly and broken? Who told you that you are only measured by what you give others? Who told you that brokenness and frailty are what you carry? Haven't you heard? You are not what everyone says you are. You are who God says you are, and you are His. He says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He says you are a perfect design, made for a purpose, made for a destiny, and you are never alone. He says He'll never leave you nor forsake you. He goes before you. He goes behind you. He says you are bold. He says you are brilliant. He says you are brave. He says greater is He that is in you. You are a masterpiece, hand-painted by the Master Himself. You are who God says you are.
Welcome to Christian Bootcamp, a Back to Basics Bible study led by the Reverend Dr. B. Kevin Smalls. Christian Bootcamp is a back to basics approach for faith, supported by biblical studies, theology, doctrine, spiritual formation, and special topics. You are in the right place, at the right time. Let's get into formation and begin.
Sorry about that. Welcome, everyone. We greet you in the name of Him who is the Christ, and I want to make sure we're all situated here. I have a lot of stuff up here. I gotta make sure I can still connect with you. And we want to say greetings to our Zoom callers who are calling in. Greetings to our Facebook Live people. Looks like in my room we got 19 folks in here tonight. Feel free, if you don't mind, you can share this feed and invite people in. That's always a cool thing to do for others who wish to have some engagement with Bible study. Also, YouTube Live folks, hello. You're typically our largest group, and it's about 30 of you so far, so we welcome you in the room tonight. I'm excited to have you all here. It means a great deal to us. I want to ask, if you haven't, to grab a Bible tonight, and next week we will be doing some deep reading of text, okay? Some deep reading of text. But we'll be reading them in the voice, or we'll be reading them as feminists and womanists tonight. All right, we're going to try to take an angle of biblical interpretation for womanists and feminists. Now, I want to remind you, those who are new to boot camp, this is not a class of indoctrination. This is a class where we actually introduce concepts to expand our faith. And the reason we call it boot camp, because some of this stuff is hard. Some of this stuff is challenging. Some of it is inspiring. Some of it is eye-opening. And some of it is like, I don't know if I'm feeling that, or that's going too far. But listen, it never hurts to hear other concepts and how people arrive at things. That doesn't mean that, you have to change your belief systems or anything like that. But you always want to be open to ideology and listening for conversation. And you realize that a lot of work that Jesus did was doing just that with Pharisees and Sadducees. He had conversation with people, deep theological conversations throughout his entire ministry. And we need to be okay doing that too without being scared someone is going to steal our belief system, all right? So this is indeed boot camp. So we want you to get ready, roll up your sleeves, and let's do some heavy lifting tonight. So again, I want to also let you know I'm going to try my best to monitor these rooms for questions. So feel free to ask any questions you may have throughout our conversation tonight. I also want to invite you again, if you don't mind, turning to Genesis 16. We are studying Hagar tonight in the context of Abram and Sarai, and later Abraham and Sarah. But we'll be looking at what the experience was of Hagar and how we might get deeper insight into feminist and womanist thought as we celebrate Women's History Month. So again, let's turn to Genesis 16. Interesting. All right, let's turn to Genesis 16, and we'll jump in. All right, I'm going to pause for just a second. Marcus, do you hear that? Huh? Well, it seems like it's something clicking, but maybe not. Okay. All right. I thought I heard something back there. All right, sorry about that interruption. that was quite weird and interesting. I heard some noise in the sanctuary and I couldn't quite figure that out. All right, let's open with prayer and then we're going to jump in. We might be a tad bit longer tonight because I really want to cover as much of this as we possibly can. Let us look to God in prayer. God, for this time and for this day, for this class, for this gathering of your people, we do thank you. We thank you so much for enlightenment. We thank you so much for inspiration. We thank you for your word. We believe it to be true, and may it continue to expand our faith, deepen our faith, and enlighten our walk. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, friends. So tonight, what I kind of want to do is begin our conversation. I want to display how a feminist and or a womanist might read the text, all right, and how the text might impact them. So just so you'll know, for next week, we're going to be looking at a very difficult text, and that is the rape of Hagar. So we want you to be prepared. Let me see if I can pull that up. I believe that's 1 Samuel 13, and it's about 22 verses, and we'll take a look at all of that. All right, 1 Samuel 13, and let me make sure I'm giving you the right one. I'm almost sure. Okay. 2 Samuel 13, I apologize. 2 Samuel 13, first 22 verses. We want you to read that this week coming, just to familiarize your story with that horrible experience. But let's kind of dig into that. Tonight, we're going to dig into Genesis 16. I hope all of you have your text. All of you are ready. And let me know if you're ready, if you can. Don't forget also that the T-shirts are on sale too, and I've been failing to mention that, but please know that our T-shirts are on sale. You can get all the information there too on our website, and thank those of you who have ordered some. So we want to spread the word around our Christian Bootcamp, and we thank you for your energy and passion about studying the word and studying all things related to God, theology, doctrine, spiritual formation, and biblical studies. So here we go. Genesis 16. I just can't wait to get into this. All right, Genesis 16. Let me make sure. So I'm going to start reading it, and then we're going to kind of slowly begin to take some of it apart, okay? We're going to slowly take some of it apart. And please forgive me for my pauses because I have a lot of items open up here that I have to get through. I want us to look at the first 16 verses of Genesis 16, and let's go from there. You ready? All right. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. She had an Egyptian slave whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "You see that the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my slave. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." and Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife. He went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my slave to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Your slave is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she ran away from her. All right, so let's take a look at that. That was the first 7 verses. And let me get your chats back here so I can see your conversation. And forgive me for having so many pieces open here to work through. All right, let's tear this apart a little bit. Genesis 16 begins with a narrator. Now, let's be clear that there is someone telling this story. Abram's not telling it. Sarai's not telling it. Hagar is not telling it. There is a narrator telling it. So we're moving in and out of voices throughout these verses. The narrator is using one type of language, but the characters at times are using another. Now let's start from the beginning. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. Sarai was wealthy. She wasn't a peasant girl. She wasn't a poor girl. She was wealthy, and she was wealthy enough to have her own slave. We argue about what to actually call her: slave, mistress, hand servant, or what have you, maid servant. But nevertheless, Sarai was wealthy enough to own somebody. She had an Egyptian slave whose name was Hagar, we read. And Sarai said to Abram, "You see that the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my slave. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. It may be that I will develop by her. It may be that I will gain my worth by her. It may be that she will restore my dignity in the village by her. It may be that she will be able to bring dignity and respect to this house." To be barren was embarrassing, and it was a major way of failing your husband. So that was the last thing you wanted to be. Now keep in mind that God indeed let this couple know that they would definitely bear a child. But notice what Sarai says. "The Lord has prevented me from bearing children." So, husband, what I want you to do, what God cannot do, let's count on Hagar to do it. Wow. All right. What God cannot do, let's count on Hagar to do it. And through Hagar, I will be somebody. Through Hagar, I will achieve what it is that I seek. Not only does Sarai go behind God's back, she takes matters into her own hands. What does she do? Let's read it. This language is amazing. So the third verse says, after Abram lived there 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her slave, and gave her to her husband, Abram, as a wife. Now, I think, quite frankly, that language that she took and gave is very interesting. I don't know if Dr. Simpson is here tonight, but it's reminiscent of what Jesus would do in a sacramental fashion on the Last Supper. He took bread, and after giving thanks, he gave it. Jesus takes himself and gives it. Jesus doesn't go and secure anybody else. Jesus doesn't go and look for anybody else and complete this mission. This mission of new birth and new life through him, not through anybody else, but through him, is from taking and giving. So Sarai takes Hagar and gives Hagar to her husband for the purpose of securing new life. For the purpose of securing life that seems impossible with the original wife. The second thing is, not only does Sarai pass Hagar off, but they become husband and wife. Abram and Sarai become married. And as a result of this, it reduces Abram and Hagar become married. As a result of this, it reduces Sarai's role with Abram. She is no longer the only wife. She still is the first wife, and she's still in control of her husband, but her husband now has two wives. So Hagar does not see Sarai in the same way anymore. Hagar does not see Sarai as her owner, if you will, anymore. Hagar can say, "This is my husband." Would he not become my owner? Would he not be the one I'm accountable to at this time? Would he not be the one that I honor and I recognize? Not you, Sarai. So she kind of feels, Hagar, no doubt, that she is a slight peer to Sarai. What doesn't help this situation also is, if you will notice, what did Abram say in this text? Let's read it together. Let's read it here. Let's take your time and let's see. Abram didn't say anything, did he? Abram didn't say anything until the 6th verse. This text centers around a man in between two women, and the man is silent. And quite frankly, Hagar is silent. Hagar is so silent, I mean, she says nothing. Sarai takes her and gives her. Take and give. And by the silence between these two women, in my opinion, I can easily read in here that there is some tension here. There is some unfriendly vibes going on between Sarai and Hagar. Hagar's voice is silent. We hear nothing from Hagar. The only one we actually hear talking is the rich woman who is barren. And her husband goes along with the program. He's acquiescent, if you will. He's okay. If that's what you think, okay. We don't have any resistance to the plan. Nothing. Abram buys in to his wife's plan to create a scenario outside of God's plan. All right. Now, let's notice here. Let's continue. We can look at the 6th verse. Oh, I'm sorry, the 5th verse. Then Sarai said to Abram, I'm at verse 5. May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my slave to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. And her problem is, Abram, why would you allow this? You see how she's looking at me. You see how she treats me, and you say nothing. Absolutely nothing. And this is on you because you aren't in control of her, which further suggests that Abram assumes more control of her than Sarai did. Sarai gives her away almost, and she makes it clear, I gave my slave to your embrace. In other words, and this is what I get. This is what you give me. And so far, we have nothing from Hagar and one word from Abram. And Abram says, but it's your slave and she's in your power. The King James Version, I think, says she's in your hands. You figure it out. Now let's stop there. What we're beginning to see is the trace and the beginning of what it looks like from the point of view of a slave seeking freedom. Bondage. Who else was in bondage? Israel was in bondage. They were the people begging God to be free, were they not? They were the people seeking release from Pharaoh's rule. It is God who says, I have heard the cry of my people. Let my people go. This is almost a precursor to that. And it's almost parallel in very similar fashion to that story. Hagar we learn of Hagar in the 16th chapter as a slave to a rich woman. Then Hagar is sent to fulfill what the rich woman cannot. The rich woman is older and barren. Hagar is young and fertile. Hagar has promised. Sarai has written herself off as any possibility of promise. So Sarai exploits Hagar's resources, which is herself. She exploits her slave and demands her slave to her husband, and the slave becomes another wife of her husband, and the slave conceives. The slave begins to resent or look at the Sarai in a different way. We don't have the term resent, but Hagar looks at Sarai differently, because for a moment, Hagar has been empowered to be a mother, to bring her husband's child into the world and to achieve something that her oppressor and her boss could not come up with at this time. And so, y'all roll with me here, roll with me. What does Sarai do? Let's pretend that it never happened. Oh my gosh. All right, let's act like this didn't occur. Let's just say it didn't happen. As a matter of fact, Sarai, the 6th verse says, Sarai dealt harshly with her. In the same way, Pharaoh dealt harshly with the slaves, the Israelites. They almost use the same language. And what did Hagar do? She escaped. Because that is typical behavior of any slave who is oppressed and beat down and made miserable. She got up out of there because she was being treated harshly, and Abram wasn't doing a thing about it. Abram empowers Sarai to do this. Sarai is given permission to do it, if you will. Abram is not getting in between this. He is not getting in between the two women that are at odds with each other over him. So she runs away. Now, let's look at 7. Let me check in and see if y'all doing all right. Looks like y'all doing good. All right. Let's look at verse 7. This is good stuff. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? He's wanting this angelic presence is the first one in this text. The first one to actually call her name. Sarai not one time called her name. This slave. This slave. This slave. Abram not once called her name. The angel comes and calls her name, but attaches to her name almost as it's part of her identity, her position, her job title. Hagar, slave of Sarai. Now, technically, Abram is married to Sarai. So anything that belongs to Sarai belongs to whom? Abram. And especially Abram's wife, even though the angel of the Lord did not identify her as Abram's wife. The angel of the Lord identified her as Sarai's slave. For the first time, Hagar speaks. I am running away from my mistress Sarai. Uh-oh. Now, Hagar does not identify herself as a slave. That is not the language Hagar is self-identifying. It was Sarai who uses the language slave. It is the narrator, but it's not Hagar. We might have a difference of opinion right here on what their role is. Hagar considers Sarai a mistress, someone she supports, someone she helps, but she certainly doesn't use the language slave. Then listen to what the angel says. The angel says, return to your mistress and submit to her. Now, this is very difficult here. It's very difficult. So, Hagar has figured out her escape. She's figured out her solution to her problem, which is the oppression of Sarai and the oppression of a man who remains silent. Both of them, in Hagar's mind, are dysfunctional to some degree, and she ain't have nothing to do with it in her mind. She was minding her business. This wasn't her plan. This wasn't her idea. The woman took her into her husband, forced her to marry the man, and gets mad about the aftermath of it. All right, so she starts getting treated brutally, and Hagar says, you know what? I don't have to deal with it. I don't have to take this. I'm rolling out. She found an answer. It's almost to say, Sarai, you can have Abram. Abram, you can have Sarai. Y'all do not have to worry about me. She decides to take it in her hands and move forward. All right, so we're at this point together so far. The pain that this must be to be visited upon the angel of the Lord and to be told to go back to your oppression. Go back. Go back to the one that is abusive. Go back to the one that is mean-spirited. Go back to the one that is basically in control of this scenario. The 10th verse says, the angel of the Lord also said to her, now, so it's not, you're not just going back, this is what I'm going to do. I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, now you have conceived and shall bear a son, and you shall call him Ishmael. For the Lord has given heed to your what? Affliction. The Lord has given heed to your affliction. Now, let me tell you, affliction was the same term used for the Israelites under Pharaoh. God had seen their affliction. And here we have the same language. The Lord has given heed to your affliction. The Lord knows that this is a messy situation, but the Lord is going to bless you. You're going to bear a son, and you should call him Ishmael. Second thing offered, He shall be a wild ass of a man, with his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall live at odds with all his kin. Now, a lot of people think this is a curse. This is not so much a curse as it is a foretelling of what's to come. Ishmael will have his hand against everyone, and everyone will have his hand against him. Sarai has her hand against Hagar, and Hagar has her hand against Sarai. And quite frankly, Sarai had her hand against Abram, and Abram, by supporting Sarai, had her hand against Hagar. So what is happening to Ishmael is he is inheriting this vicious cycle in his own life. That's right. Felicia says, I agree, she created this drama. She did. Sarai was impatient and she jumped the gun. And whenever you jump the gun, you cause confusion and delay. You mess up everything. And now everybody's got to deal with your lack of faith and your impatience. God told you what to do, and you decided that God has taken too long. You bring this poor girl into a scenario, and not only do you bring her into it, but you bring her son into it. And that's the problem. This is what you're going to do, the angel of the Lord says. You're going to name him Ishmael, because that means the Lord has seen your affliction. God has seen it. However, I want you to know this young man, he's going to be all over the place. He's going to have some trials and tribulations. He's going to have struggles. Now look what happens in the 13th verse. So she named the Lord who spoke to her. Lord have mercy. You are El Roy. For she said, have I really seen God and remained alive after seeing him? Therefore the well was called Beer-shai-roi, and it lies between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him. Now, let me say this. This interaction between the angel of the Lord is the first time. It is the first time when God visits upon a woman and tells her that she is about to give birth. When was the other time this happened? Very interesting, isn't it not? Did not the same thing happen to Mary? And not only are you going to give birth, I'm going to tell you what to name him. But instead of him being a difficult person, this child you bring in the world, Mary, is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He will rule the nations, you see, and you will name him Jesus. Mary was not the first woman to get such a visitation. It was Hagar, whom Sarai didn't want to name. Also, whom Abram never up to this point called her name for anything. She goes back and she has this child. Now I see some dialogue here. Let me see what we got. That's right. Okay. Oh, Sister Harris, I'm sorry. it says that Abram went into Hagar as a wife. That doesn't mean she was his wife, just that she was in that role. Hagar had no say in anything that happened to her. That is correct. Hagar has no say into anything that happened with her. But I think we understand that I'll have to look that up. I think that the concept was that she was elevated, and it may not be, but she was a bit more than a concubine here. But I'll definitely look that up and kind of bring that. That's a very good point. And that's one of those things in terms of how you actually read the text. Very good point. Brother Boyd, I rarely blame Abram because the promise was to him first in verse 2 of Genesis. It shows that Abram chose to listen to his wife. I really blame Abram, and that's a very good point. It's also interesting to note that God did not talk to Sarai about this at all. God talked to Abram, and Abram wasn't able to manage this. Now, Sarah overheard it and laughed at it in disbelief. God seemed to be offended by that and scolded her. Wait a minute, what's so funny? Oh, that's impossible. I'm too old. Well, what's impossible with you is one thing, but all things are possible with me. So don't write me off like that. I think you had that kind of dialogue there. Absolutely. All right. So far, what have we received here? We received that Hagar, some very interesting things. She was a poor girl. She was the maid support to a rich woman. The rich woman was old and barren. Hagar was young and fertile. We also learned that Sarai made Hagar sexually engage her husband, and that leads to conception. Hagar, for whatever reason, begins to look at Sarai a little differently. Now, Sister Harris suggests that Hagar wasn't elevated to marriage. And some writers suggest that Hagar was, which kind of reduced Sarai's role. And I'll leave you biblical scholars for that, but I'll look into that and come back with some of that as well. So Sarai begins to be brutal after complaining to Abram for not controlling Hagar. So Sarai makes Hagar's life miserable. Hagar escapes. She rolls out, hoping to never return. The angel of the Lord catches up with her, almost as God caught up with Adam and Eve. Hey, where are y'all? What are you doing? What's going on? Where you going? What's happening here? The angel of the Lord catches up with Hagar, and for the first time, Hagar is named. Hagar speaks, and Hagar is made to go back. All right, now I want us to jump to 21, Genesis 21. All right, so let's kind of start here reading Genesis 21, and I invite you all to turn to Genesis 21, and let's take a stab at the first verse and see how this thing wraps up. The Lord dealt with Sarai as he had said. Sarah. All right, so now the names have changed. They're Abraham and Sarah. The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said. And the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son, whom Sarah bore him. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now Sarah said, God has brought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, who would ever have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Now the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian. Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian. So we're not naming him? Okay. Whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. Now, Isaac gets to be named. Hagar, the Egyptian, is named in a rare moment by the narrator, but they don't name Ishmael. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son. Again, we're having a literary path of disregard of their personhood. The only time Hagar was received as a person was when the angel visited her with respect. Sarah still wrestling with it. Sarah got what she wanted. Sarah was blessed and is still troubled by the results of her plan. So in the 10th verse, she says to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son, whom? Isaac. Now, you see how that sentence is there? It's mentioned twice. Get this slave woman out with her son, because this slave woman's son will not inherit with my son Isaac. You see, to call someone's name is a form of respect. To refer to somebody as an object is a form of disrespect. And all we know right now is Hagar has been objectified in this scenario. She was a device for Abraham. And I'm not saying that Abraham didn't have feelings for her. I'm not saying that he didn't care for her. I don't know. But all I know is so far, this woman was only utilized by this couple to help them out. And then in turn, she gets ostracized for it. She gets criticized for it. She experiences affliction for it. And on top of that, she's made to go back in that environment and have her son therein. What we read is after Sarah tells us to Abraham, Abraham doesn't say anything yet. Abraham doesn't say no. Abraham doesn't say, I can't do it. The 11th verse says, the matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. Not Hagar. This was distressing for Abraham because of his son, whom we still aren't naming. So we now have some issues with the narrator. Feminists and womanist readers will struggle with the way this text is narrated. I'm here to let you know. And the second thing, well, the fifth thing maybe, I don't know, they struggle with how Hagar is treated from a literary angle in the text. Abraham is very distressed because of his son. What about Hagar? Lord, help us here. 12th verse. And let me check in on y'all and see if y'all. Ooh, Pastor White, why didn't Sarah claim Ishmael as her son, since she said previously that Hagar would have a child for Abraham and Sarah? That's a very good question. But her plan, I think she got consumed in her own hatred and in her own inability to bear children, and she got consumed with hatred and jealousy. And after a while, the original purpose began to dissolve. It wasn't about Abraham anymore. It had become about Sarah. Well, at that time, it wasn't about Abram. It had become about Sarai and Abram and Sarah. That's what sin does. It contaminates everything. And then you lose your ability to manage it and control it, and then it just gets all out of whack, and I think this is what happened. That would be my suggestion toward that. All right, let's look at the 12th verse. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. So now we're getting a look into Abraham's heart. Because God knows the heart, does God not? And now we see, Pastor Reggie, that Abraham actually cared for Hagar, and this also could be a subject of concern for Sarah. Years later, Jesus would come and say, you cannot serve two masters. You must love one, or you're gonna love one, or you're gonna end up hating the other. Or you ain't gonna be able to serve both of them. And I think God knows this. And I think perhaps God's response to end this misery is not so much to take up for Sarah, but to make it right by what Sarah is doing. They both agreed on it, but for different purposes. Sarah thought it was the best thing to do because of how she was fearful of the inheritance issue. But God knew it was the best thing for them to do because this plan of Sarah's would never, ever work in this household. And Abraham's house will always be consumed with crisis. All right. Let's move a little into this. God is giving Abraham permission But God said to Abraham, 12th verse, do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also because he is your offspring. Now we're still seeing Ishmael not being named here. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now let's stop here for a minute. Hagar is actually getting what she originally wanted. But this time she's getting it in a way of humiliation. She wanted to leave a while ago. She left a while ago. So Hagar's journey has been from bondage to motherhood, to escape, to return to bondage, and to be kicked out and homeless. They were sent away, and they wandered in the wilderness. It's different. The Israelites were not sent away. A way was made for them to escape, and they too wandered in the wilderness. I am telling you that Hagar is the precursor to Israel. She is Israel. I suggest for you. Now, the 15th verse suggests that when the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. No one shows up. In the next book of the Bible, there will be another encounter at the bushes, and God will show up there, but no one shows up here where the child is in the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off. Now you can read the despair in here. This is beginning to be too much for her to handle. It's too much. She was a little away, about the distance of a bow shot. And for she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." I don't want to see it. I've already seen too much. I can't bear seeing anything else. As far as Hagar is concerned, even now she is beginning to put some emotional distance from her and her son. In this instance, she doesn't name him either. She says the child, because the only way she can bear this trauma is unless she builds some space in between. Woo! Lord have mercy. I'm almost done. Let me wrap this up. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. The text is telling us that she is using her voice in the midst of her despair, and she wept. Now listen, this is boot camp, and this is why it's boot camp, the 17th verse. God heard the voice of the boy. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? What's going on? Why is this child out here crying? Why aren't you at your post, Hagar? This child needs you." Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. And there we have it. There we have it. Dr. Phyllis Tibble concludes it this way, and I'm about to let you go, but I want you to hear how she says this. And she, by the way, is one of the great feminist biblical scholars. You can read into this the light of contemporary issues and images. Her story depicts oppression in talking about Hagar, in three familiar forms: nationality, class, and sex. Hagar the Egyptian is a maid. Sarah the Hebrew is her mistress. Conflicts between these women revolve around three males. At the center is Abraham, their common husband, she says. To him belong Ishmael, child of Hagar, and Isaac, three males. Through their husband and his two sons, these females clash from the beginning. However, Hagar is powerless because God supports Sarah. Kept in her place, the slave woman is the innocent victim of use, abuse, and rejection. As a symbol of the oppressed, Hagar becomes many things to many people. Most especially, all sorts of rejected women find their stories in her, the feminist scholar says. She is the faithful maid exploited. She's the black woman used by the male and abused by the female of the ruling class. The surrogate mother, the resident alien without legal resources, the other woman, the runaway youth, the religious fleeing from affliction, the pregnant young woman alone, the expelled wife, the divorced mother with child, the shopping bag lady carrying bread and water, the homeless woman, the indigent relying upon handouts from the power structures, the welfare mother, and the self-effacing family whose own identity shrinks in service to others. She is the first person in Scripture whom a divine messenger visits and the only person who dares to name the deity. She names God. And within the historical memories of Israel, she is the first woman to bear a child. This conception and birth make her an extraordinary figure in the story of faith. The first woman to hear an annunciation, the only one to receive a divine promise of descendants, and the first to weep for her dying child. Truly, Hagar the Egyptian is the prototype of not only special, but all mothers, all women, and I dare say all black women in Israel. What do we do with this tonight? What do we do with this? We got to do right by Hagar. We have to find a way to do right by Hagar. We have to do right by Michelle Obama, who gets called a monkey by professional politicians, elected politicians who hold a seat in the House of Representatives. We have to do right by Ketanji Jackson, who was ridiculed and abused even though she was the highest marked candidate out of all others in the past 20 years to hold a seat in the U.S. Supreme Court. We have to do right by the nameless women who stand in line to vote, putting their job at risk of being terminated. We have to do right by women who are killed by police, the Breonnas of the world. We have to do right by Hagars wherever we find them and wherever we see them. We have to do right by them. We have to honor. We have to support. We have to uphold. We have to strengthen. We have to encourage. We have to love. We have to exercise patience. Because at the end of the day, the only reason why we are here and the only reason why we're healthy is because some Hagar in our lives came to get us at the bush and make it through trials and tribulations. All right, friends. Yep, that's right, Pat. Ishmael was about 14 years old when Isaac was born. Yeah. All right, I pray that we've done our justice with this work tonight, and that we constantly remember the Hagars who are left out, who are not named, who are not recognized. This is why we should see the movie The Hidden Figures. This is why we should read up on them. This is why we need to read up on Harriet Tubman. This is why we need to hold fast to these wonderful and marvelous witnesses of strength, of Rosa Parks, people who would have ordinarily been left out. And we now have a system that tries to leave us out and leave our story out. Who will tell the story now? Who will tell Hagar's story? Perhaps it's you, and perhaps it's me. Thank you for tuning in. God bless, and good night.
Welcome to Christian Bootcamp, a Back to Basics Bible study led by the Reverend Dr. B. Kevin Smalls. Christian Bootcamp is a back to basics approach for faith, supported by biblical studies, theology, doctrine, spiritual formation, and special topics. You are in the right place, at the right time. Let's get into formation and begin.